everybody.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, my name's Jamie Bradley. I'm a front-end developer from Middlesbrough. Massive thank you to Sam and the guys from Frontend Northeast for letting me come along. And, yeah, huge thanks to you guys for coming along. I appreciate it. You know, just after Christmas, but great turnout nevertheless. So I am extremely nervous about this. This is my first ever kind of like public speaking event. So, 2019 and all that. What better way to come in and, put yourself in a horrendously awkward position. But we'll see how it goes. When Sam contacted me and said, like, yeah, we've got the place for you. You can come in. I'm pretty sure this is exactly what I look like. It was an Animoji previously. This would have been moving and it would have been brilliant. But today, Keynote decided to go crazy. So the point I'm making anyway is that if I do muck up or if I do stumble, please bear with me. It would be greatly appreciated, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Little bit of shameless advertising here. This is my company, Endeavour Digital. I founded this company in 2017 and originally started as a JavaScript contractor and freelancer. In 2018, I moved into a more permanent premises called Boho 5 in Middlesbrough. And as a company, we offer a range of services, but primarily we do React development, Gatsby development, which isn't there, but I guess that falls into the JAMstack. We provide WordPress themes, we do Shopify themes, we build bespoke UI frameworks, and this nice little car, I had to get this in here somewhere, is something that we built for Zero Light, which was pretty cool. And some of the other clients that we've worked with include Sky, DWP, Zero Light, Increment by One, Primitive Sense, and more. Sorry, Glenn from Primitive Sense is here today. So yeah, if you are looking for some front end resource or you're looking for a freelancer, then please give me a shout. So on to JAMstack. So I think it's fair to say that we'll start by saying that more websites are abstracting their front end away from monolithic systems. So in other words, we're now seeing that front ends are now interacting with back ends via APIs rather than the traditional LAMP stacks and stuff. And this is great because it means that we're now able to develop our web apps in the browser with our favorite frameworks, and this is pretty awesome. So JAMstack, is essentially a static website architecture, and JAMstack is a term that was coined by a company called Netlify. It's not necessarily about specific technologies, but it's a new way of building websites and apps that deliver better performance. They provide higher security. They give you a lower cost when it comes to scaling, and it gives you a better developer experience. So really what we're going to be talking about today is a collection of guidelines and practices for building static websites. Now, I mentioned Netlify briefly there. I must say I am not sponsored by Netlify. I just really, really like using it. But because Netlify coined this term JAMstack, their platform is pretty much geared towards JAMstack sites. So that's going to come up quite a lot. I just don't want you guys sitting there thinking, oh, for Christ's sake, it's just a sales pitch for Netlify. Promise you it's not. So JAMstack.org is the official website for JAMstack. And if you go onto there, you'll see that the definition of JAMstack is a modern web development architecture based on client-side JavaScript, reusable APIs, and pre-built markup. And as Sam kindly alluded to in the introduction, that's the jam. Yeah. So it's not, unfortunately, a stack of jam jars like what we saw at the start of the slide. If we look at JavaScript in a JAMstack site, we're saying that any dynamic programming during the request response cycle should be handled by JavaScript, which only runs on the client. So that's the key there, that this JavaScript is only running on the client. So we're not talking about like a Node.js app where JavaScript's chucked on the server. It's purely client side only. And this includes the use of a JavaScript framework. So if you had a static site that was built using React or Vue, Angular, whatever comes out tomorrow, or a jQuery, or even plain vanilla JavaScript, that would be fine. When we talk about APIs, we touched upon this briefly just now. The idea of abstracting the front end layer away from this, this monolithic bubble, if you will. All server-side processes or database actions should be abstracted into reusable APIs in a JAMstack site. APIs are accessed over HTTPS with JavaScript, again, from the client. Now, this could include the use of third-party APIs, so something like Stripe if you were looking to manage payments, or I'm not sure if you're familiar with Contentful, but a headless content management system such as Contentful, or I suppose you could argue WordPress, Prismic, there's tons. And again, this would apply for custom-built APIs. Now, finally, markup. So we're all familiar with markup. It's the bread and butter of a website, but in a JAMstack site, we say that markup should be templated and pre-built at deploy time. And we can achieve this by using static site generators. So does anyone here use static site generators for? Yeah, so a good chunk, yeah. So if I'm talking about Jekyll, Hugo, Gatsby, which is a React-based static site generator, and I think I've got enough time to do this, but I'll hopefully show you a quick demo of a site that I'm working on that's built with Gatsby in a JAMstack environment. But yeah, these are static generators that we can use. But we can also achieve this by using something really simple like a build tool, such as Webpack or Gulp. I personally like using Nunjux as a good templating language. It's pretty ideal. And again, this is something that you can do with Gulp or Webpack, which is something we do at Endeavour. If you are deciding to look for a new static site generator, or you don't know of a static site generator, you can head to this website, staticgen.com, which is a brilliant resource that will help you find a static site generator for JAMstack sites. As you can see there, when we clicked on the templating language, there was a shitload. So a tool like this is going to be really handy. The site will actually sort all of the results for you by popularity, which is, again, pretty handy because you can see how well supported it is. So we've briefly talked about, a little bit about what JAMstack site is, or at least what the definition is, but let's move on to look at an occasion when a site might not be built with JAMstack. So I'm hoping this works. I've got a slide here that will build up into a diagram, which will show you a website built with a server-side CMS. So we're talking about something like Craft CMS or like a traditional WordPress build. The lovely little guys on the right-hand side here are our users, and they make a request to your website. Let's assume it's called mysite.com. From their browser, they perform a GET request to the web server. Now, we're working with a site that's built with a content management system, so we need to get some content. So the web server is going to make a request to the database server. It's going to query the database for the content and return that back to the web server for us. This will then carry out an operation, which would be to get that data, pass it via a templating language or whatnot, and spit out some HTML for us, and then give us any CSS or JavaScript that we need. You might also want to use a third-party API that you can fetch via the client. So, I don't know, an example would be your top 10 Instagram posts or whatnot. So this, yeah, quite familiar with this. This is kind of like a traditional LAMP setup, if you will. So a JAMstack site is not a site purely built with a server-side CMS, e.g. Craft, WordPress, pretty much that example that we've looked at. It's also not a single-page application that uses isomorphic rendering to build views on the server at runtime. That's the key there, getting views at runtime, because with a JAMstack site, as we'll look into shortly, you actually build your views at deploy time. And finally, a monolithic server-run web app that relies on Ruby, Node, or another backend language, this would not be classed as a JAMstack site. So, taking the same example, let's have a look at how this site might look in a JAMstack environment. So we've got our little guys here that are going to make a request to your site, mysite.com, but this time the site is served on a content delivery network, and we're simply just going to get back the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript that lives on that content delivery network. And again, we might want to make a call to a third-party API via the client, in Instagram posts as an example. But what if we want to change the content that lives on that content delivery network? So let's assume we have a group of developers and a group of content managers. And the content managers are using Contentful, which is a headless content management system. So in other words, it's just API only. And the developers are pushing their code up to Git. What we can do is we can use something called a webhook to instruct a service like Netlify, again, there's that cheeky mention, to to tell Netlify that it needs to trigger a deployment or a build. So what will happen is that Netlify's CI server will make a request to a content API, in this case, Contentful. But again, this could be WordPress, or it could even be Shopify if you wanted to return back some products. That data is requested from the appropriate API, sent back to Netlify for us, and then that CI server will carry out a task that we've told it to perform, and this is where the static site generators come in, yeah? This passes all of the data into HTML, as it did in the previous example, dumps it on the CDN, and then that's what the user will see next time they go to the site. So it might seem that there's quite a bit difference, and it seems a little bit clunky, but I think that the benefits are there. So that moves on to this. Why would we want to use a JAMstack site over an alternative architecture? Well, there's 4 key benefits in my opinion, and well, as per the JAMstack site as well. The first one is that because we're using static sites, they tend to be more secure. They are cheaper to host. You gain performance benefits. And finally, the developer experience is a lot nicer. So let's look at security to start with. Well, the first one is that we're just serving a static site from a CDN. So there's no direct interaction with your database. Your website is just static HTML. So you've got reduced attack vendors. Now, it's funny this. I was talking to my apprentice today about this particular slide, and he said, oh, when I was watching you do this, I think of a bridge. I was like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, with a bridge, if you've got a bridge going from one side of the river to the other, people can climb up it, they can get under it, they can blow it up. There's tons of ways that they can interact with that bridge. If you take the bridge away to get to the other side, it's a lot harder. So if you think of it that way, this slide isn't saying that a JAMstack site is indestructible. It's just, that complexity is reduced, right? And finally, by using third-party services, such as something like Contentful, we're leveraging domain expertise onto these specialist third-party services. Now, there's a guy called Phil Hawksworth that, again, works for Netlify, and he published an article about moving the complexity elsewhere with the JAMstack site. And I'll just read this little blurb that I've extracted from his article. JAMstack does indeed move complexity elsewhere. It moves it out of the critical path at request time. It moves it out of your area of responsibility, and it moves it over to domain experts who offer specialized services as commodities. It is perfectly possible that complexity still exists, but we don't need to shoulder that burden. In the same way as wireless routers depend on wires and serverless functions run on servers somewhere, but not in my house. And I think that kind of paints a brilliant picture. It's, the complexity is there, but it's not for me to worry about. I'm just going to focus on building a really nice site for my client. You guys deal with it. So cheaper hosting. So there are affordable services out there. So, we've got things like AWS S3, Cloudflare, Netlify. And because JAMstack sites, static sites, hosted on content delivery networks, it's much cheaper to scale. If you think of the traditional kind of, website architecture that we were looking at earlier, if you wanted to scale this site, you would need to spin up another server. But with a content delivery network, you don't need to do that. So it's much cheaper in the long run. Because you've got a simpler site that is more secure and is easier to maintain, you have less unpredictable expenses. So, in my opinion, and from my experience, I found that less things go wrong. And as a result, clients aren't having to spend more money for me to maintain their site, etc. And better performance. So some of this we've kind of already touched upon, but yeah, we're serving pre-built markup. And the pre-built markup has been built at deploy time, not at runtime. So that whole process of having to get the data and then pass it into the template is gone, apart from at deployment. Now, earlier on when we talked about the definition of JAMstack and how I said it wasn't necessarily about technology, but more a set of guidelines and standards. On the JAMstack website, there's a little section that talks about best practices. And these 3 here, atomic deployments, instant cache invalidation, and hosted on a CDN, they are part of the best practices for a JAMstack site. So when we talk about an atomic deployment and as a result, reduced downtime, what an atomic deployment would be is that if we imagine a content writer has made a change to Contentful, as per that diagram earlier, that deployment instruction's been sent over to Netlify or whichever host we're going to use, or CI service. But the idea here is that your site stays up in the latest version of that site. So your site's not going to go down during the phase of the deployment. Sorry, and then when the deployment's completed successfully, we introduce an instant cache invalidation. So what I'm saying here is that when the deployment's complete, your cache is automatically purged instantly so that you really have the latest version of your site, which is nice. You're not having to tell people to clear the cache or et cetera, et cetera. And finally, hosted on a CDN, which I think we've covered already. Now, the first time that I came across this concept of JAMstack was about a year and a half ago, and again, on the Netlify blog. But Netlify actually partnered with Smashing Magazine to build the latest version of their site. So I don't know if anyone uses Smashing Magazine here, but you might have noticed that over the last year, it's gone from like a white page to a very red, crazy looking page. But that is actually a JAMstack site. It's actually all static. So previously, Smashing Magazine used to use WordPress to manage their content management system. And I think they used a handful of different other services to take care of the e-commerce side of things. But Netlify actually partnered with Smashing Magazine and produced a static CMS for them and a series of APIs that they could use through Netlify functions, I believe, or Lambda functions. And Smashing Magazine have wrote an article where they've noted a 10 times boost in performance as a result of it. You guys can't see this, but I've got a huge list of links on here that I'll see if I can get them shared somehow with the deck. Sam's given me a thumbs up, so that looks good. So finally, your sanity as developers, having a better developer experience. So one of the standards or one of the best practices that JAMstack promote is that everything lives in Git. And I mean, I know we should be doing this anyway. We should be version controlling our code, but to have that enforced is quite nice. We have more flexibility with technical decisions. Again, we've abstracted that front end away from the monolithic world. So we're not tied into a particular templating language. So like with Craft, for example, I think you have to use Twig. So you're stuck into that, whereas, we can move away from that and say, no, I want to use React, so I'm going to use Gatsby. So you can build whatever you like. It's really nice. So this slide was a bit of a tricky one, I'll be honest. I thought it would be unfair for me to come here and start saying how awesome JAMstack is and not actually play the devil's advocate. But are there any trade-offs? Well, thinking about it, I think the only couple of trade-offs that you could have with a JAMstack site, the first one being is the size of the content or the amount of content that you might need to pass into your site. So if we think back to the diagram that we looked at earlier, and we had the third-party service where we were requiring data, if you have lots and lots and lots and lots of content that needs to be passed over through a HTTP request on the CI server, that means your deployment time is probably going to take a little bit longer. So in the demo that I've got here today, I think it roughly takes somewhere between 30 seconds to 60 seconds, which isn't too bad. But if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages and such, that might go up to like 3, 4, 5 minutes. Atomic deployments do save that because, as I say, you haven't got any downtime during that period. You've still got an instance of your site up and running, but you or your business or your client, it might not work in that way. So in that sense, you might be better off sticking with a full server-side content management solution. We've talked about a few different tooling options, which could be difficult for new starters, but to be honest, I also think that's a good thing. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm going to say it's not really a trade-off, but it's it's the only thing I could really think of. My apprentice seems to have managed okay. He's only been developing for about 4 months now, and he seems to have settled into Gatsby and Webpack quite nicely. And to be honest, I quite like the idea of throwing him into the deep end anyway and just getting it out the way, rather than sort of spoon feeding him. But one thing that I do think is a problem, especially if within your shop you've not really got any standards in place, is this concept that I like to call shiny syndrome. So all of a sudden, we as front-end developers have been given the responsibility of being able to pick whatever stack we want to use to build our front end. And it's quite easy to look at the next thing that comes up, the next framework, and say like, ooh, shiny, I want to use that. But that new shiny framework might only be around for 6 months to a year, which isn't good for your client if, we're going to build the front end with an unsupported framework. So I think as long as you've got standards in place and as a team you're agreeing on what tooling and what frameworks and things like that you want to use, then I don't think it's so much of a problem. So, sorry, I had half a bottle of lager before I started and it's really dried me up. So how does Netlify tie in with JAMstack? So as we mentioned earlier, the term JAMstack coined from this thing that Netlify put together. So naturally, they've basically built a service that completely revolves around JAMstack. And these are some of the things or some of the benefits that you get from using Netlify to host your static site or to host your JAMstack site. And these are, we'll be able to look at some of these things throughout the demonstration. But first one is that Netlify gives you what they call a global ADN. It's basically the CDN, but ADN stands for Application Delivery Network. And the reason why they promote it as that is because you have a content delivery network with much more, which is the things above it. So when you create a site in Netlify, HTTPS is automatic. They basically use Let's Encrypt to provide you with an SSL certificate, and that gets done straight away. For me, that's absolutely awesome, because the minute I have to log into any kind of cPanel or some kind of server, no. So it's nice that a service is taking care of that for me. It works with, GitLab, GitHub, and Bitbucket. I would probably class these as the three main, Git providers. And it's quite satisfying when you create a site and you just simply connect everything together. And then as part of that, the automated deployments work for free. So this is an interesting one, Lambda functions, because we talked about this idea of, having purely static sites. But if we need that little bit of server-side logic, then we can use Lambda functions, which are basically little, I believe the term is functions as a service. So if you need to run a bit of server-side code, you can basically create a Lambda function that sits inside of Netlify, which is just wrapped around an AWS Lambda instance. And it will basically execute the code that you need via the backend. And they also provide something called Identity API and Forms API, which I can go into, but it's not really relevant for this. So I've kind of whizzed through that pretty quick. I'm happy to go on to a demo, but I kind of have like 10 minutes to kill. So does anyone want to ask any questions at this point, or would you like me just to push on with the demonstration? Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So how it works from a Netlify perspective is that you have these things called Netlify functions. So that's basically where you're going to plonk your Lambda function, and you basically call a little endpoint. I'll be able to show the a brief example in the demonstration, because I've used it for WordPress authentication with JWT auth tokens. And basically what I do is I have this little function that I hit via a GET request or a POST request, and that gets executed inside that little container. So yes, you probably do the same thing there. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I have got a page that I can show you which has some more examples, but Prismic's a really good one. That's like a great headless content management system. The demonstration that I'm going to show you is actually a self-hosted WordPress instance that I've made headless. So in other words, the theme's there to manage internal functions, but it's not there from a presentational perspective. So you can get around it that way. There's tons, to be honest. What I'll do is, as part of these collection of links that I'm going to put together, I'll see if I can actually remind me on. There's a headless CMS page equivalent to static site gen, so I'll try and dig out the link while I'm setting the demo. Anyone else? All right, cool. If you can bear with me 2 minutes, I'll just get the demo set up, and then we'll go from there. Okay. I'm going to do this now before I forget. headlesscms.org. So pretty much the same setup as the static site gen.org, I think it was. Similar filtering, but yeah, this will basically give you everything that you probably need. There's a really good one called Graph CMS, I think, which is basically a GraphQL driven one. But I think you have to pay for that. But some of these, like Contentful, they have like a really good free paid plan, so you can get so many requests a month. Where if it's just for a small site or it's just for for your portfolio or whatnot, it's absolutely perfect. Same with Prismic, that's another really good one. But yeah, headlesscms.org is the place to go for that. Okay. So, has anyone used Gatsby before? Yeah, cool. So quite a few. So I'll tell you a little bit of background about the site that I'm going to show you. So when I originally planned the talk, there was a site I wanted to show you, which is set up in the same way, much more stable than the one I'm going to show you today. But unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, I can't demonstrate it at the talk today. So what I've done, my wife, who's actually here today, has just started up her own company called You First Nutrition. Mel just recently graduated as a nutrition coach through a company called Body Type Nutrition, which means that if there are like people who are looking to lose weight, or people who struggle to actually gain weight, or people who are maybe athletes and are looking for like a tailored nutrition program, then they would go to someone like Mel or a nutrition coach and ask for guidance. And one of the things that Mel's looking to do is she wants to basically create an online service where people can pay monthly plans, and basically plans can be passed back and forth between clients online. None of that functionality is built. The whole purpose of this demonstration is to show you the content side of it. So I built it with Gatsby, and this is a perfect example of or a perfect diagram to show you how it's going to work. So we're using WordPress, and again, I've kind of made it headless. But when you were asking about the different content management systems you can use, there's Drupal up there. You can even use Markdown. So I don't know if anyone's ever looked into Netlify CMS, but it is a little static React application that lets you content manage content through the use of Markdown files in Git. It's really cool. But again, this is something that you can pass in as a data source, and then of course your own bespoke APIs if you need to. You can write little plugins, what are called source plugins for Gatsby, in order to acquire that data and then pass it into the GraphQL world. So as you can see, what will happen is a build will be triggered, and then that will basically fetch the data from the data source. It will tell our little GraphQL gateway to what data we want to get out of that data source through a query that you write inside of Gatsby, and then it spits out HTML, CSS, and React, which you can then deploy to your static web host. And again, we talked about some of the different ones, but you can see that GitHub Pages is there. I've never heard of Aerobatic, but I'm sure they're all just as good. So this is the website. It's a very rushed. Like I say, when it came to picking which site to choose, it was literally just before the Christmas break, so I've kind of stumbled this together over a matter of days. But this is the area that we're really going to focus on. We have a collection of articles which are put together in WordPress. And we have a collection of recipes which are also put together in WordPress. I can show you WordPress. So I've not activated Gutenberg because it sounds like a heap of shit at the minute. But what I've done is I've used advanced custom fields because I've got a pro license and I want to get the use out of it. So I've set that up, and I have also created a custom post type called recipes. And inside of our recipes, you can see here that we've got, these are all of the advanced custom fields, which is really good actually, because it gives us very similar functionality to what you would get through something like Contentful or Prismic. You can basically go in and say like, all right, this is what I want my data to look like when I pass it down the wire. And it's nice. It's like familiar world really. So what's going to happen is in a recipe, we're going to retrieve some macros, which is essentially nutritional information, different ingredients, and then steps for the method. Again, it's just full of mumbo jumbo. But let's take a look at this example, and let's say that this one here, disclaimer, this isn't Mel's cooking. These are Mel's cooking, but this one's from Pexel. She told me to say that because apparently it doesn't look very nice. But let's say that this is wrong. This is actually a cheat day pasta bake with homemade garlic bread. So if we go inside of our recipe here and change that to lasagna. Now this is interesting. So here we're going to when Gatsby makes the request to the WordPress API, the permalink will be passed down as the slug, and the slug is actually used to generate the routes for your view, for your views on the Gatsby site. So this will become clearer in a moment. In fact, actually, I'll show you. So if I click on this now, you'll see here that currently says cheat day lasagna with homemade garlic bread. This worked earlier, but hopefully this will. Hang on. So the content editor is coming here. They've made the change. So what should happen now is that Netlify's triggered a deployment. So this is, when we think back to that diagram, this is the log from the CI server now. So what's going to happen here is the CI server is basically just a little Docker container that Netlify put together. So it's installed all of the containers dependencies. This is the key bit. So this is the call to the WordPress instance that's going off and getting all of the different things. And all of these different post types, pages, all of the little content types are basically defined inside of a config file in Gatsby. You basically say to it, here's the different endpoints that you need to go to. So that's going to go off. It's going to purge some CSS. So basically this is a little Gatsby plugin which is going to get rid of any unused CSS that's not required. And site is live. So that was pretty cool. That was pretty quick. So now did that say lasagna before? It did, didn't it? So is that the change that I put in? Yay! So yeah, the point is the change has been made within a matter of a few seconds. A new deployment's gone in. The atomic deployment was there because the page was still running while the deployment was taking place. The instant cache invalidations kicked in, so it's purged the cache. We've now got the incorrect spelling of lasagna. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's essentially the setup. Now, some of the other cool things that we can do inside of this Netlify dashboard, I'm going to just, again, not a sales pitch, it's just I've got a little bit of extra time than I thought I would, so I'm going to quickly show you some of these. But the functions, right? So this is where your Lambda functions would live. Now, this is probably a cool little example to do. So one of the challenges that we found in the project that I wanted to show you today was that the client would actually have no way of previewing the content when we make WordPress headless, because if you think about how the preview functionality works, it needs to use the theme that is baked into the instance of WordPress, right? But we've basically taken that away now. So something that I'm working on, which I'm really gutted I couldn't get it done, but I wanted to try and get all of this functionally working today. But I suppose I can kind of show you the concept. So what will happen is in WordPress, we're using a plugin called JWT auth tokens, I think it is. And basically what this will do is it will make a call to our Lambda function called preview login, which will basically authenticate the user details that I put into the page here against WordPress for us. And then that's going to return a token, which we then store in local storage. Now, what we can see is any posts that are in draft and any pages that are in draft. So the idea would be here that if Mel's got a post that she wants to put up, but she's not quite ready to put it live, she wants to see a preview of it, she could go into this environment and then click on the post. Now, because Gatsby's built with React, what we could do, in theory, is we could basically take the component that's used to build the post template and pass in the data that we call from the WordPress API via a JavaScript fetch, rather than what we do through GraphQL, etc. on the server. So I don't know. What I'll try and do is get this done in the next week or so and include that with the links and write a blog post about it or something. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it. But if this works out right, I think it'll be really cool, and it's something I really want to get onto GitHub. So, any contribution would be welcome. But if we were to go into our posts here, and let's say we want to add a new post. So let's save that as a draft. And then let's go back to the preview, reload it. We should now see posting draft hello front end northeast. So that's all it's doing at the minute. It's not really that cool, but in theory, what we could do is click on that, and then we would be able to see, the template, this template to be more precise. This template, but what it would do is it would actually, request the data via a client-side request as opposed to what we do through the CI. And I guess the other thing to note really is that it's quite snappy. It's a lot faster. Sorry. And again, that's because we've taken away that whole database interaction. We're just literally calling static content that's passed in. And we've also done a little bit of a sneaky thing with WordPress. The instance of WordPress is actually behind a Cloudflare instance, so I've got quite a lot of caching going on as well for assets and stuff. And that whole setup seems to be working really well. So that's it, really. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks for listening to me, ramble on about this. And yeah, I hope you go away and take something from this and have a look and start using JAMstack. Cheers.